Greetings. Some of you will be seeing this on the Sabbath. Shabbat Shalom to you. Some of you will be seeing this as the new week begins. So Shavua Tov to you, good week. We had a custom in the yeshiva world that on Saturday night we would gather together, we would have refreshments, we would sing, and we would have instruction. This was called Malava Malka, accompanying the Queen, saying goodbye to the Sabbath as the new week begins. And very possibly this was what was going on in the book of Acts when Paul spoke till midnight. It very likely was a Saturday evening occasion when he spoke till midnight. You remember Eutychus fell and had to be resurrected. Well, please, all of you, pay attention. Don't anybody fall asleep during this talk. It's not going to take till midnight in any case. I want to say that I diminished the greatness of Billy Graham last week. I apologize. I said that he claimed that he read 3 Psalms a day. Actually, it was 5, so that he could finish the book of Psalms in a month. So I want to give credit where credit is due. We're friends with a woman who married one of his sons, and she's what we call it, what is used to be known as an ABC, American-born Chinese. My wife and I actually stopped with 4 children. We had read somewhere that 1 out of every 5 children born in the world is Chinese. Well, anyway, I like to go to 2 Timothy, the 3rd chapter. This is a very serious prophecy about the way things are going to be before the coming of Jesus Christ. You know the saying, it's always darkest before the dawn. And there was a great rabbi who wrote at the time of the Holocaust who said that Elchanan Wasserman, who said that right before a candle goes out, there's one last strong flicker and then it's out. And he said that's what's going to happen right before the Messianic time. There'd be this surge of wickedness, and then it will, of course, be wiped out. In fact, the Talmud in Tractate Sanhedrin also has this similar prophecy about how things will morally deteriorate before the coming of the Messiah. I want to turn to 2 Timothy 3. But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy. By the way, speaking of unthankful, that's one thing we can deal with, this week before Americans. The Canadians have had their Thanksgiving Day last month, second Monday of October. As I'm speaking, we're about to have the national holiday of Thanksgiving in the United States, the 4th Thursday in November. So certainly we can try to deal with this issue of not being unthankful, but rather being thankful. Now, these are characteristics that, of course, are current through history, but evidently they will intensify before the second coming of Christ. We have to be very careful, whoever's listening to me, that our values are scripturally grounded. More and more nowadays, people are not really grounded in any stable instruction regarding morals and ethics, whether it be the Bible, the judeo-christian tradition, or in many cases, whatever their great philosophers taught them in the past. We're as a world becoming kind of unhinged from the basis of a stable society. And it's very important that we maintain values. I want to talk today about a ruler who had lost sight of that, unfortunately. And I want to go first to 1 Samuel, the 15th chapter. The 15th chapter. I guess I will call this talk Maintain True Value. Maintain True Values. I'll call it Maintaining True Values, because that's really what we must be doing. Maintaining true values. We know what they are. They're in the Bible. The judeo-christian heritage is certainly an effective guide for anyone, whether he be a believer or not. There are many people who at least claim to be moral, if not spiritual. and they will also teach many of the same principles that I'm teaching to you, so the basic ones. There is, however, a point to a belief in the fact that we will be accountable. that is certainly, if not absolutely essential, certainly a great encouragement to behave oneself if we know we're going to be accountable. But in any case, we need to be maintaining true values. And in 1 Samuel, the 15th chapter, the king of Israel at that time, Saul, the first king of the whole of the United Nation, was told to carry out a commandment that God had given in the book of Deuteronomy. A very wicked people, a very evil people existed near the Israelites, the Amalekites. And the Israelites were told, once you settle down in your country, you've got to destroy those people. They're just that bad. Of course, only God could give such an order. Can carry out that kind of an order, or give that kind of an order. Now, he could have had them all die of the plague, but he told the Israelites, "You're going to be my executioner, and you will destroy those people." Well, Saul had the opportunity to do so, and he treated it as a time for booty, not to obey God's commandment, because God said, "Get rid of everything, don't keep anything." And his people evidently pressured him, at least so he claimed later. We don't know what his rule was. It may be that he just, that he bowed to the pressure, but they kept some of the best of the livestock, and they claimed, well, we're going to offer an offering to God. Well, that's nice, but I doubt that they were going to do that with all of them. They probably, I imagine they saved a lot of the good livestock. Then they were going to, yes, offer some to God, but then I would imagine the rest was going to be booty. And not only that, but he actually saved the king alive. Here was this murderous, wicked king who had taken so many lives, and Saul had spared him for whatever reason. So he had not followed God's command. So Samuel confronted him. Samuel, who was a judge and prophet, confronted him, and Saul claimed that he had carried out the commandment, but really he had not. And so in verse 20, and Saul said, this is 1 Samuel 15:20, okay? 1 Samuel 15:20. And Saul said to Samuel, "But I have obeyed the voice of the Eternal, and gone on the mission on which the Eternal sent me, and brought back Agag, king of Amalek. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites." No, you haven't. The king is still here. Now, it's interesting. If you go into the book of Esther, you find... Saul is a descendant of Kish. You find a descendant of Kish named Mordecai, a Benjamite, confronting Haman, who's called the Agagite there. One wonders whether Haman was a descendant of Agag. And so we have the Amalek-Benjamin quarrel centuries later. And as you know, Haman wanted to destroy all of the Jewish people. As if to avenge the Amalekites. It's interesting. There was one movie that capitalized on that Jewish tradition. I think it was called One Night with the King. It was a biblical movie that came out, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or so, that maybe some of you have seen. It's certainly available to be seen. But here we have Agag, who is spared, and he shouldn't have done that. Nor should he have spared all of those animals, for whatever purpose, because God didn't want them to be sacrificed. He wanted them slaughtered. That was what God's command was. He has life and death power over all of us. Verse 21, but the people, well, let's go back. And Saul said to Samuel, this is verse 20, "But I have obeyed the voice of the Eternal and gone on the mission on which the Eternal sent me, and brought back Agag, king of Amalek. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took of the plunder." See, now they're shifting the blame. This is human nature, right? All through the Bible you see this, and all through life you'll see this, obviously. "But the people took of the plunder, sheep and oxen, the best of things, which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice to the Eternal your God in Gilgal." Well, yes, he is Samuel's God, but he's also Saul's God. What is this, the Eternal your God? Anyway, and Samuel said, Has the Eternal as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Eternal? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. We have to keep that in mind. Morals and ethics are much more important than ritualistic activity, technicalities. That's a whole other subject. There are people I know who are ritualistically, very punctilious. They're very careful to carry out every ritual of their religion, but at the same time, they're involved in, let's say, activities that are let's say, questionable, to use an understatement. Verse 23, that kind of reminds me, I didn't want to say this, but it kind of reminds me, back in 1970, we had an archaeologist, I won't give his name, but he was having trouble with the ultra-Orthodox rabbis in Israel at the time, and here was his comment. This is not my comment. I come from that community. But this archaeologist said about these ultra-Orthodox rabbis, the longer the beard, the bigger the liar. That was his comment. But that's his comment. I come from that community. I wouldn't say such a thing. Anyway, verse 23. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. You see this? We don't want to get involved in the occult or weird, bizarre practices, but rebellion is of a similar sort of thing. It's satanic. It's self-destructive. Rebellion against God. For rebellion is as a sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Eternal, he has also rejected you from being king. And now here we come to Agag in verse 32 of this chapter. And Samuel said, bring Agag, king of the Amalekites, here to me. So Agag came to him cautiously. Of course, because Samuel knew he needed to be executed. And it's interesting. Once wicked people are kind of caught dead to rights, if I can use that expression, then they often have this kind of attitude. Well, let bygones be bygones. After murdering all these people, let bygones be bygones. And so forth. Now that they're caught. Then Samuel said, bring Agag, king of the Amalekites, here to me. So Agag came to him cautiously, and Agag said, surely the bitterness of death is past. Oh, really? After all you did? You are worthy of execution. Capital punishment is your destiny, I'm saying. But obviously, he was trying to wheedle his way out of that. But Samuel said, as your sword has made women childless, you see, plural. As your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless among women. And Samuel hacked Agag in pieces before the Eternal in Gilgal. So he set the example of, what God thinks of people such as that, murderous tyrants. My rabbi in the yeshiva, Rabbi Yehuda Davis, when he went over this verse, he used the term Litvak. A Litvak is a Lithuanian Jew. Actually, on my father's side, I'm a Litvak, and he made the comment. He made the comment very colorfully, one Sabbath afternoon as we sat around the table eating and drinking and singing, and then finally being taught the third meal of the Sabbath, the Yasudash Lishit, what they call in Europe Shalashudas. Anyway, we're sitting around and he's teaching us, and he says, Samuel hacked up Agag like a Litvak hacks up a herring. Anyway, so he was worthy of execution, and he got it. And you see, Saul was willing to spare this murderous tyrant. Now, this is what happens when people reason perversely in this way. When people are merciful to the cruel, they wind up being cruel to the merciful. This is a principle that the rabbis teach, and the life of Saul illustrates it. Here he was going to spare this murderous tyrant, and yet what does he do later? In 1 Samuel 21, we find David seeks refuge in a community of priests, and he gets food for his people, and he gets a weapon. The priest did not know that David was fleeing from Saul, that now he had become a criminal. David was a loyal servant of Saul. David never rebelled against Saul. David was devoted to Saul. And yet, here he is, being pursued as if he's a criminal by Saul. And the priest wouldn't have thought this. David was a hero and a loyal patriot. So the priest helped him out. You know, David was dishonest with the priest. He's trying to save his life. You know, and he told him he was on some secret business. So the priest had no reason not to believe him, so he helped him out. And then in verse 10, then David arose and fled that day from before Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath. Now I want to go to 22 and verse 6. 1 Samuel 22 and verse 6. Now, unfortunately, there was evidently an Edomite there, Doeg, a servant of Saul, who didn't have any particular love for David. He was loyal. He was a servant of Saul. He was an Edomite. He didn't have any particular feeling of kinship with David, who was of the tribe of Judah, an Israelite. And here was a Gentile servant of Saul. And so he reported to Saul that David was there. Verse 6, when Saul heard that David and the men who were with him had been discovered, now Saul was staying in Gibeah under a tamarisk tree in Ramah, with his spear in his hand and all his servants standing about him. You know, he's in pursuit. He wants to kill David. It's so sad. Then we're in 1 Samuel 22:7. Then Saul said to his servants who stood about him, "Hear now, you Benjamites. Will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all captains of thousands and captains of hundreds?" So he's trying to develop some kind of feeling. He's of the tribe of Judah, not of the tribe of Benjamin. But he was a son-in-law of Saul. And you know he was a fair-minded man. David was a man after God's own heart. "All of you have conspired against me." Now Saul was paranoid at this time, and he felt like people were being disloyal to him because they were shielding David. But they knew that David had done no wrong. And they didn't want to have this feud going. They didn't want to have Saul to have David's blood on his hands. They didn't want to see David killed. But to Saul, this was treason. "All of you have conspired against me, and there is no one who reveals to me that my son has made a covenant with the son of Jesse." You know, Jonathan and David is a classic friendship in the Bible. A man-to-man friendship. Even though Jonathan's father was an enemy of David, and David did honor Jonathan's family, as you know, if you know the story of David. "All of you have conspired against me, and there is no one who reveals to me that my son has made a covenant with the son of Jesse. And there is not one of you who is sorry for me, or reveals to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait as it is in this day." So he even accuses his own son of treason. Well, he was a mentally sick man at this point. Then answered Doeg the Edomite, who was set over the servants of Saul, and said, "I saw the son of Jesse going to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. And he inquired," this is verse 10, "and he inquired of the Eternal for him." Now that didn't happen as far as I know. He did bend the rules a little bit to give him food. I won't go into that subject today. But it doesn't seem to me that from reading the account, that he did anything out of the ordinary. Oh, he did give him food out of the ordinary, but his men were starving. And he inquired of the Eternal for him, gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Well, that part is true. So the king sent to Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests who were in Nob, and they all came to the king. Now, obviously, Saul should have had a great deal of respect for these priests. These priests were called into the service of God. These were, in effect, a holy tribe, the Aaronic tribe. And Saul said, "Hear now, son of Ahitub." How would they say it in English? Ahitub? Anyway, and he answered, "Here I am, Lord." Then Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me?" It's probably Ahitub, right, in Hebrew. Anyway, then Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, and that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me to lie in wait as it is this day. No, he isn't plotting with him. He isn't conspiring against Saul with him. He's just protecting him and his men, not realizing that Saul's after him. So Ahimelech answered the king and said, this is Ahimelech now, the priest. His father is Ahitub, but this is Ahimelech, the priest, and he had a whole community of priests there. So Ahimelech answered the king and said, and who among all your servants is as faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law, who goes in at your bidding and is honorable in your house? Did I then begin to inquire of God for him? Far be it from me. Let not the king impute anything to his servant, or to any in the house of my father, for your servant knew nothing of all this, little or much. I didn't know you had this quarrel with him. I didn't know that he was fleeing for his life because you wanted to kill him. And the king said, you shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house. Isn't that horrible? Now remember, this was the same Saul who spared Agag. The same Saul who spares Agag is now going to murder this priest. And not only this priest, but his entire family. You see, when you become perverted like that, that's what happens. Up is down, down is up, right is left, left is right, whatever you want to say. Black is white, white is black, whatever you want to say. You just get distorted. As one of my old friends who is no longer alive, a world-famous evangelist, once said, when you get into this frame of when you get into this attitude, your mind scrambles. Then the king said to the guards who stood about him, turn and kill the priests of the Eternal, because their hand is also with David. And how does he know that? Right? And because they knew when he fled and did not tell it to me. Well, they didn't know that he was a fugitive at that point. But the servants of the king would not lift their hands to strike the priests of the Eternal. Well, good for them, you see? They had a conscience. They knew this was wrong. And the king said to Doeg, oh, now we have an Edomite who doesn't care about the worship of the Eternal. He's not an Israelite. He has no particular respect for the Israelite priests, evidently. He's a loyal servant of Saul, and he knows this. If he carries out this order, then, he's going to be moving up the ladder, right? And then the king said to Doeg, you turn and kill the priests. So Doeg the Edomite turned and struck the priests and killed on that day 85 men who wore a linen ephod. Isn't that horrific? What a thing to read. But you read about tyrants through the Bible, and then you read about tyrants through history. And this is the kind of thing that happens. Abuse of authority, to say the least. Also Nob, the city of the priests, he struck with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and nursing infants, oxen and donkeys and sheep, with the edge of the sword. I think the point here is that Saul wanted to warn anybody, don't you dare give any assistance to David. I think that was the point of this, to spread terror. Don't you dare lift a finger to help David, was the intent of this. And yet David wasn't even a criminal of any sort. Now, one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, as we would say in America in English, Abiathar, escaped and fled after David, and Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the Eternal's priests. So David said to Abiathar, I knew that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul. Could you imagine how David felt? I should never have done this. He saved my life, but now at the cost of his own and the whole city. This was really a burden for David. Wow. Let's read the whole verse. I interrupted myself, as I often do. Let's go to verse 22. At least other people aren't interrupting me. I'm interrupting myself. All right, verse 22. So David said to Abiathar, I knew that day when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have caused the death of all the persons of your father's house. Verse 23, stay with me. Do not fear, for he who seeks my life seeks your life, but with me you shall be safe. So he committed himself to save the one remaining survivor of that family, who became a high priest for David. Unfortunately, Abiathar later on was not loyal to Solomon, but at least throughout David's life, up until the time he chose Solomon, for about 40 years, and even before, while David was still a fugitive, Abiathar was with him, protected by him, and became one of two co-high priests under David. Unfortunately, at the end of his life, he didn't stick with the program, but for all those years, he was a loyal priest and protected. So the family, therefore, lived on. The family of Ahimelech, the priest, lived on through Abiathar. So this Saul, who had spared the life of a murderous tyrant, wound up murdering a city of innocent priests. And this is the lesson that the rabbis learned from this account, which is valid historically. If you're really analytical and watch the news carefully, you'll see that those who are merciful to the cruel will be cruel to the merciful. I want to go to 2 Timothy 3. And remember that Paul warned Timothy that before the second coming of Christ, there would be a moral deterioration. There is a Jewish tradition that the Messiah could come if there's a mass repentance. So there's such a great revival that it brings the Messiah. However, more than likely, it's the other scenario. Things get so bad that he must come. And this is, of course, what Jesus says, that things get so bad that, if Jesus were not to return, then the world would self-destruct. I want to go back to 2 Timothy 3 and talking about the times before the coming of the Messiah, the second coming of Christ as we understand it. But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good. This is a very powerful verse if you're keeping up with the way things are going in the world around us. That as we come closer and closer to the time of Christ's return, we are going to see these characteristics: unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good. So people that have lost their moorings, they don't have a stable base from which to make value judgments. It's just moral and ethical anarchy, and this is the kind of situation that will be in the earth, on the earth, before Jesus Christ's return. So I don't know when that time is going to be, but I know that this is a warning to all of us in any generation to maintain the values that are revealed to us in the Bible. And even if you don't want to look at the Bible as a divine revelation, look at it as a guideline, as a very basic guideline, the judeo-christian heritage, Western civilization, which is critical if we're going to have a stable environment for people to have a chance to achieve their potential in life, to live a quality life. We need to have a moral environment, an ethical environment. We need to have that kind of stability. We need to have the kind of a world where people survive, not only just survive, but survive as human beings, survive with a proper quality of life. So let's learn from the Bible and let's be maintaining true values. To those of you who are American, we have a holiday coming up very soon, so happy Thanksgiving. And to all of you, all the best to you and yours.